Hello, everyone. It's Heather Herbay. Welcome to the Baker Art Room. This past semester has allowed me to reflect on my teaching practice, and I was able to identify a lack of multicultural art lessons being taught as part of my curriculum. I teach in a school where the majority of my students are white, and so I often felt awkward talking about race with my students. Out of ignorance, I operated with a colorblind mentality, believing it was socially acceptable not to draw attention to racial differences or skin color. It wasn't until this past fall when I heard Bettina Love in an interview with Brian Jones say, abolitionist teaching isn't for black schools. It needs to be in white schools. It was then that I felt a responsibility to teach multicultural art lessons to my students, not only so they could learn about different races and cultures, but also so they could learn about racial inequality and also how to promote social justice. In addition to implementing a multicultural curriculum as part of my research, I'm also interested in collaborating with another art teacher in the city of Pittsburgh so that we can provide opportunities for our students to engage in art making experiences with students from different racial backgrounds. In order to conduct my research, I have centered on qualitative action research as my methodology. The reason I chose qualitative action research is because I am seeking to improve my teaching practice, and this will allow me to do that as part of my research. As I conduct my research and as I see changes that I can implement those changes as part of my research and then continue on with my research. I created the main research question that I will be pursuing this coming school year. How does a multicultural curriculum coupled with art making experiences with students from different ethnic and racial backgrounds impact attitudes about race and social justice in elementary students? Like I said, this research question will be pursued next at the beginning of next school year. But as part of this class, I conducted a mini research study where I asked the question, how does a multicultural unit utilizing picture books and the Big Idea family enable third and fourth graders to talk about race? As part of this research, my third grade students explored the Big Idea family. In small groups, they observed and then answered questions about different works of art that pictured families from different racial, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. After they worked in groups, then the groups then shared their observations with the rest of the class. In addition to observing and then sharing observations about these works of art, students also listened to the picture book by Patricia Polacco called In Our Mother's House. This was a story about a family with two mothers, and they adopted three children, all of different races. My fourth grade students also explored another big idea, and this big idea was identity. And their work or their artwork was in response to the portrait quilts created by Bisa Butler. To introduce this unit, my students looked at five of Bisa Butler's portrait quilts, picturing African Americans from different time periods. And then they answered questions in small groups and then also then shared their observations with the rest of the entire class. My students are still in the process of creating a portrait of a special family member that they will explore, whose identity they will explore in more detail as part of the project. In collecting my data, I used observations. I tried doing a live observation where I did not record the observation, and I did this with one of my fourth grade classes. Then I recorded one of my fourth grade classes and one of my third grade classes. So I had two additional observations that I recorded, and I found this was much more successful as it gave me, as it helped me to reflect and remember important details from the classroom's experiences. In addition to my observations, I also conducted two different interviews. One was a small focus group with four of my fourth grade students, and then another was a focus group with four of my third grade students. I also had the written questionnaires that both my fourth and my third grade students completed as part of their small group work, and so that also helped collect. That also helped me with the collection of data. So, what were the key findings from all of my data? The first was that students' written and verbal observations from looking at works of art really lack details, and a lot of my students often really struggled to interpret meaning when looking at a work of art. Correspondingly, some students were able to construct meaning, and they did this by either using past knowledge of literature or they made some connection to what they've been learning in prior curriculum or classes. My school also has a population of minority students that I was not properly recognizing. Um, there is a strong ethnic heritage among a lot of my students that I feel I need to do a better job of recognizing and celebrating. Um, my students also were able to recognize racial differences in works of art nearly 3 times more often than when they didn't recognize it at all. So they were able to um, observe racial differences in works of art. What did I learn from these findings? The first thing was that I need to provide my students with more opportunities to observe and respond to works of art. And it was evident with their inability to really do this successfully. And the responsibility is really on me because I haven't provided these opportunities for them in the past. I also learned that my discussion questions, I believe, need to be more structured. And I learned this through my own data, observing my own data, but also from an observation done by my school's principal. That was one of his suggestions, which was very helpful. Another thing that I learned was, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, my school is more diverse than I thought, and I need to really focus on creating community among my student body before we then engage in a community-based art making experience with another school. Another key thing that I learned was teaching with big ideas is a very effective way to structure a multicultural art curriculum for elementary students. And I want to really continue this moving forward, just as a general practice. And then finally, collaboration with other classroom teachers to create meaningful connections both to ELA and social studies curriculum would also really help to strengthen my multicultural art curriculum that I plan to um, create and then teach to my students. So the final thing that I leave you with is the impacts of my research. And what I hope to continue to do and what I've been able to see thus far is that multicultural art curriculum really allows students the opportunity to observe works of art, to respond to works of art, and to create works of art, all with the purpose of opening their minds to be accepting of differences. And so I really look forward to continuing this work in the fall.